for our 2026 NOFA. So, oh, Elizabeth, oh, wait, Jessica, you started. Thank you very much for starting that. So we have our usual cast of characters here with our homeownership development team. You'll be hearing a little bit from me. I'm Susie Sandstrom, one of the development officers. I'll be doing most of this presentation. We'll have Elizabeth Thomas, another development officer you must know, will be helping field questions in the chat. And then Jessica McKinnon, our Senior Homeownership Development Program Analyst, will be providing some valuable information in this presentation as well. So just some general housekeeping per usual. This meeting is being recorded. Please stay on mute. And if you have any questions, you may enter them in the chat at any time. And as I said, Elizabeth will address those or flag me if I need to stop. And lastly, at any time, feel free to raise your virtual hand if you have a question or comment. But we will also pause throughout the slides to see if there's anything that you want to say. All right, so here's our agenda for today. For the most part, this is going to be a high-level overview of non-project specific topics. But as I said, we will have time intermittently and at the end for some questions. So if you want to follow along, you can refer to attachment A, due diligence conditions, and that was included in your invitation to complete due diligence. So that document provides a little bit more detail on all the due diligence conditions, but since some are pretty straightforward, we'll spend more time on ones where folks usually have more questions or want additional clarity. But do read that in its entirety if you have not done so already.
You know, I was wondering if I should run out to Palm Harbor and see what.
Okay, so we're going to start here with the Procore Work Centers. And so before we get into those due diligence conditions, I just want to give a quick review on the distinctions between your two work centers. So you all have this partner portal. As you know, this is typically used as a repository for your organization, things that don't change too much, like your Secretary of State Business Registry, something that might be organizational specific, like your annual tax returns. You know, there's no need to upload that into every project you have with us. You can just do that once in your partner portal. That as opposed to the project specific work centers. So as far as the project specific work center is concerned, only one of these will be active at a time, and you'll move through these in your different stages of development. So of course you were aware you had your application one for a bit, then you got your invitation to complete due diligence. You moved into this work center. This will stay active until you get Housing Stability Council approval. Then at that point, we'll scoot you on into this development work center where you will stay for about the next 3 years until construction is complete and the homes have sold. And then lastly, we'll bump you into this annual monitoring work center where we have a lot less contact, maybe just annually, as it says there. And this will remain active for the remainder of the affordability period. So between the two, most of your tasks are going to be in the project specific work center. There will be a few in the partner portal, like, you know, this annual tax returns or the fair housing resolution. So remember to check there occasionally, or you will have those email reminders in Procore in case you have something due. But mostly we'll be over in the project specific area. Okay, and Elizabeth, just let me know if any hands are going up or anything, because I can't see that as much. All right, so another quick review of the LIFT program lifecycle. Hopefully this is a little bit familiar to you. So you have finished your concept proposal, and next, today we're going to spend most of our time in the due diligence section to see what's due there, as well as the reservation and loan closing. So we'll spend most of our time there, and then I'll just briefly review these last 3 phases of construction, completion and home sales, and compliance and monitoring. Just in case this is a lot of information for today, there will be plenty of time to, absorb these whatever is needed in these later stages. Okay. So, as you know, due diligence is separated into 3 stages with various items due at each stage. So, I do want you to note that the dates and deadlines that I'm going to be posting today or talking about today, these are specific to this first cohort. So, if you're applying for the second cohort in September, the tasks will all be the same as far as this information, but those deadlines will be different. So for this first cohort, your stage 1 deadline is June 2nd. So we would like you to have all this information completed by then so that we can do your threshold scoring. A little bit later on in some slides, we'll get into greater detail about what these tasks are, and Jessica will talk about that final threshold scoring. Next, stage 2, that's a deadline of August 1st, 2026. And lastly, for stage 3, this is a firm deadline of November 3rd. So your tasks and procorum, I know you've been in there, they mirror these stages and of course those due dates. So you're welcome to work ahead, but don't fall behind. So, and now before we go on, I do want to highlight one thing about stage 1 and 2 deadlines. You do have an option to request an extension on maybe some tasks in here. However, this does not apply to updating the application workbook because we need to be able to have that finished so we can do your final threshold scoring. But for some other items, if there's a delay beyond your control, you do have this option. Say, for example, your evidence of zoning, that's a form that needs to be signed. The only person that can sign it is out of the office until June 15th. So you can just let us know. And, I think that would be something reasonable that we could approve. So if you do find that you need an extension on something or a waiver, just email your development officer with this request. Let us know the situation and when you anticipate it can be resolved. So we do have the right to accept or deny your request, but I think we are pretty reasonable people. So just let us know and I'm sure everything will be just fine. We have any questions on that first? Because that's a little bit something new. Is that all clear? And I think most of this stuff you probably talked about in a kickoff meeting with your development officer as well. Okay. Yeah, well then, Jessica, it's your turn. And just let me know when to move ahead on the slides. And Jessica's now going to talk about the threshold review.
Great, thanks, Susie. You all probably already know me, but I'm Jessica McKinnon. I'm the Senior Homeownership Development Program Analyst here at OHCS. Today, I'm just here to talk about the remainder of the threshold review. And I wanted to start with just mentioning that your application workbook has been updated to reflect everything needed for your threshold review. You've probably already looked at it. You're probably already in there doing stuff. But just stating all this anyway. Your application will have been updated with one of 2 different types of stage 1 review. The first is the abbreviated application. This is available for projects building 4 or fewer homes. New tabs on these applications will include your sources, your uses, and an operating budget. Abbreviated applications have actually already finished all of their threshold scoring and don't have any of those additional narrative pages attached. The remainder of applicants will receive the full application, which will include your sources, uses, and operating budget, as well as 3 tabs containing space for narrative responses and scoring. Slide, please. Those 3 tabs coincide with the remaining 3 threshold categories, which are equity and community engagement, project details, and financial viability and risk mitigation. Slide, please. This year, the equity and community engagement threshold scoring has been grouped into specific types of equity evaluated by different equity organizations. We have a narrative related to organizational equity, which is how your organization embraces equity in your own operations and culture internally. Then we'll ask you what your underserved populations or what underserved populations are present in your community and how your project will serve them. We'll ask about procedural equity, which focuses on how the voices of the underserved communities were engaged in the development of your project. And then the largest part of this category focuses on distributional equity, which looks at how you're ensuring equitable access to your project for those underserved communities. This includes things like MWESB outreach, homebuyer outreach and selection, and pre and post-purchase homebuyer support. We'll also give you some credit if you are a culturally specific organization or if you have a partnership with one. Slide, please. Project details should be pretty quick for everyone. We'll score the project summary that you've already submitted with your concept proposal. We'll ask you just a couple of narratives about any features or services you're providing to increase desirability of your project. We'll look at access to amenities from your site review checklist that you have already submitted, and then a narrative for any innovations that you're including in your project. And then we'll add some points based on information that you also already included in your tiebreaker about your development. Next slide. The last special category is financial viability and risk mitigation. As part of this, we'll review your pro forma and look at your committed sources, your evidence of costs, and your total project costs to make sure that you meet all of our minimum requirements, as well as some of the more subjective items. And if you're an abbreviated application, we will still evaluate your pro forma and everything as well. We just won't technically score it. We'll just be looking for minimum standards. We'll review your operating budget, which is new this year, and then we'll have a few narratives focused on your financial strategy. Those look at how you determined your sales price, how you know there's a market for your homes, and how you're looking to reduce costs in your development. We also assess a few risk mitigation factors here, including how you are preemptively mitigating the risk of cost increases, how you are planning to handle any issues that may come up during construction, and how you're identifying and planning for your most likely risks with this project. Next slide. And this is actually a good spot that I wanted to talk about our own portfolio risk review. This is something that we do for all projects selected for due diligence. And before I get into the details, I really wanted to specifically explain what that means. So when we do these risk reviews, we're not evaluating your risk as a developer. We'll never say like, you are a risky developer and we're taking a risk funding you. That's not what we're evaluating. Instead, we're looking at the potential risk to our portfolio if something were to happen to your organization or to one of your projects. So to that end, we'll look at how much active funding you currently have with us. That's things that are under construction or pre-construction. We'll look at your organization's history of timeliness with your other projects. We'll look at the financial health of projects that you've had with us already, and we'll look at how well you communicate with us about your projects. Next slide. What we'll do is we'll set a base risk based on your share of our currently active portfolio, which is going to be points between 0 and 10. Those numbers are going to be based off of the actual data of how our outstanding funding is currently distributed among our various partners. We'll consider how the new funding will impact that. We'll add the evaluation of those other factors, and then we'll set a risk level. And you will not be considered high risk based just on your funding amount. If all of your projects are all on track and you communicate well, you'll still be considered medium risk, even if you have the highest proportion of funding of anyone we have. And you can also be considered high risk even with a lower funding amount if there have been like a lot of challenges in the past. Next slide. So if you're here at this meeting, you have probably already received your risk results in Procorum. I put those in a post on your work center. If you were considered low risk, then you can proceed with some lower threshold scoring requirements. If you were considered medium risk, then you'll need to have that higher scoring threshold just on that financial scoring section. And you'll need to receive a minimum number of points on the risk-related questions in that section. If you were considered high risk, then you'll have the same requirements as the medium score, and then you'll also need to provide an additional risk mitigation measure like a guarantor or something similar. Your DO will discuss what we're looking for further if you are selected or identified as high risk. And if you need to do that, that part will be due at stage 3. At the absolute highest risk scores, we can outright deny a project, but you'd really need to have a pretty large amount of funding with us and have multiple likely very serious issues to reach that point. So we've never denied anyone on risk scores so far. Next slide, please. The NOFA contains a scoring rubric that's going to have something that looks like this. So you can see the additional requirements in the financial viability and risk mitigation section for medium, high risk, and low risk. So those are your required points. Next slide. And I've shared this slide before, probably during the concept proposal training, but I just wanted to share it again. You will need to meet a minimum score in all 3 of the threshold categories, though you will have the opportunity to cure if needed. Rural, emerging, small, and culturally specific developers will have a slightly lower minimum threshold, which was reflected on the previous slide. And then don't forget that this criteria in this application provides multiple paths to reach that minimum score. Our goal in this is to ensure that we can consider the many multiple ways that different partners can serve their communities. It's not to make you feel like you have to be able to do everything that we have thought of to put in the application. So if you can't get some of the points, don't stress about that. It's okay. We've built in a pretty large cushion in these more narrative focused criteria. I guess I'll pause really quick and see, are there any questions about the threshold scoring? All right, seeing none. My last slide, Susie, please. Oh, actually, I see Lucinda's hand.
Yeah, could you help me know? You said that our risk analysis had been posted somewhere in the notes. Where would I find that?
It's in the posts section of Procorum. So there's the
okay,
files section and the tasks section. There's also posts. So you
Yep,
can
I
see
see it
something
now.
for me.
Thank you.
Yep, you're welcome. Any other questions? All right, then thank you, Susie. So Susie also asked me to talk briefly about alternates, since that's a new thing this year. So if you were selected as an alternate this year, 2026, we've already spoken, but in case someone is watching a recording of this in the future, I wanted to share some of those details again. So just to be very clear, if you were selected as an alternate, your project will be fully funded, assuming that LIFT is also funded. You just won't be funded immediately. So alternates should expect to complete stage 1 and the threshold scoring on the same timeline as all the other applicants in their cohort. This is really the major eligibility step of due diligence, so we want to get that done and out of the way. After that, we could be a little bit more flexible. It's really going to depend on your project and how likely you are to be funded at a soon point. So for our 2026 awardees, given that the next round of funding launches in September, it totally makes sense for you to just follow the guidelines as Susie presents them, or somewhere fairly close to that, because in September we'll have full funding and we can finalize everything and get you to closing quickly. But for the sake of the recording, if, for example, you're selected as an alternate in September, it's not going to be as clear cut as it was this year because we won't have confirmation that LIFT will be funded until mid 2027. And then, assuming LIFT is funded, we likely won't have those funds to actually give you until summer of 2028. So in this case, the flexibility is going to be a lot more warranted, and we'll probably need to sit down with our 2027 alternates to really hammer out the best way that we can move forward with each individual project. So I'll go ahead and hand things back to Susie just to talk about the remainder of the due diligence process and everything else she's going to talk about.
Everything else. Thanks, Jessica. And if again, if something comes to mind later on, we'll have some time at the end for some questions. Or you can just load them in the chat and we'll get to them at the right time. Okay, so moving on then. Again, coming back to due diligence, we have your deadlines here, and now we can just get into a little bit more information as far as what's due in each one of these stages. So Jessica just talked about what needs to happen in the updated application workbook. I'm just going to kind of let you read through here, since I believe most of you are pretty well into stage one. I'm going to assume that you know what needs to happen here. Anything with an asterisk is an OHCS form, also this fair housing resolution. So is there anything here that you might have a question on? Construction cost estimates, anything like that? Okay, then I'll just keep going. Once you get then to stage two, you'll have a recipient charge that is dependent on the size of your development. Then also an involved parties meeting. And this might be if you have other funders, like a construction lender, or maybe a city is giving you a land donation. So anybody else who might be need to be on our loan documents, that's who we would want to involve in this meeting, just to make sure that we know what loan documents we're going to need, maybe what the order is, and just to make sure everybody's on the same page. Okay. Also, some of these other FEMA wetlands, BOLI, all this information is either in your task or it's in that attachment A conditions. But I just do want to highlight with BOLI, that's usually a good thing to get started sooner than later, just in case, because you're waiting on somebody else to give you that determination letter. Also with the phase 1 environmental study, that should be dated within 12 months of the NOFA application date. And as far as a preliminary title report, you can just order that from a title company, and please make sure that that's a linked report and dated within 6 months of that loan closing date, which should be in February. We'll talk about that in a minute. But and we will get an updated preliminary title report as we get closer to the close of escrow. As far as the pre-development loan is concerned, I know some of you are waiting for that information, and we're not going to get into that today, but Jessica will definitely be reaching out to you soon as far as the next steps for that. Okay. Then for stage 3 documents, on the next few slides, I'm going to go into greater detail on these 4, but just kind of reading ahead here. Just let me know if there's something else that you're not quite sure about here. That additional risk mitigation, as Jessica said, that should be loaded in your posts in Procorum. So any questions before I head into these 4? Great, you all know what you're doing. I love it. Okay, so some of these stage 3 documents that might need a little more detail. So,
Excuse me, Susie.
yeah,
I'm
yes.
sorry. We have one raised hand. I think it was Lucinda I saw.
Okay.
Sorry, I'm just slow on hitting that button. So I am seeing, sorry, all the way back to the first one with the updated application workbook.
Yeah.
Are we updating the application workbook that we already submitted?
Yes.
There's not a new one to be found anywhere in the files. We're just
Correct.
updating that. Okay, perfect.
Jessica,
Thank
do you want to just say what your system was on that? Just
Sure. When I sent out the invitation to complete due diligence, I should have also emailed you a copy of the updated workbook. I also uploaded that into what's the folder called, Susie? Is there
think
like a
application.
workbooks folder?
Was it the application?
Yeah, there's like a certain folder in Procorum that's like just for copies of your workbook. So the latest one of that in that folder, you can find it.
Let me just see. Yeah, there's a folder called application workbook. And so if anyone's ever looking in Procorum, and you'll see that task in there under, let me just pull it on over. So if you are looking at your tasks, you'll see this update application workbook in there. This is something that's due in due diligence stage 1. I don't have the due date here, but you know what it is. And it just tells you what tabs to complete and where to upload that. And so you would just upload that right over in, should be a file in here in the application. Oh, in the application workbook. That's where it goes. Okay.
We have another hand raised. I believe it's Scott.
Yeah. Go ahead, Scott.
Thank you. I don't have the workbook in front of me, but I think I saw on the sources and uses that it's not limited to just fully committed funds, but if we have a track record of receiving funds, we could use it in the sources. Is that correct? And what would you like us to show?
Jessica, I'm going to give you this one.
Sure. During stage 1, yes, you can list highly likely sources. So yeah, if you have a track record, you can list it in there and just say that you've already applied for it or it's highly likely in some way. Susie will probably get into this further, maybe, but in stage 3, we will need a completed pro forma where all of the sources are committed.
Okay, that helps. Thanks.
Mhm.
Yeah, and actually that's probably all I'll say about it is what you just said right here, Jessica, is yes, anything that was maybe committed does need to be committed by this stage 3. Hey, any other questions on this? All right, thanks for your questions. Okay, so getting to the loan documents. So your development officer will, in some of your meetings, whether that be the kickoff meeting or the meeting with the other involved parties, we're going to determine what your organizational structure is. So that's either going to be a condo or a CLT. We subdivide the land. Those are just 2 examples. We know that there are a little bit more out there. So what your development officer will do will send you templates specific to your organizational structure. So these aren't specific to your project yet, but substantively, they won't change. So you and your council will still get a good idea of what language will be used and what's in those final loan documents. And so some of those will be, you'll have an operating agreement, loan agreement, a trust deed, 1 or 2, depending on your organizational structure, a promissory note. And if you have a construction lender, you'll have an intercreditor agreement And if there are additional covenant holders beyond that, you might have a priority and subordination agreement. A real common one we see is if maybe a city is donating land, that would be a third party or a 2+ where we would need this agreement here. One thing to keep in mind that we are not going to engage the Department of Justice in negotiating these documents with you until after Housing Stability Council approval. But at least you can go through and still have a good idea of what's coming up. Any questions on those loan documents? Okay, great. Let's see. The next one then is the appraisal. What we're looking for here is an as-built appraisal with the highest and best value. This should consider the land, the homes, and other capital improvements. And it should also consider any existing restrictions attached to the land. This would not be lift or any future restrictions. We would like OHCS to be named as an intended user. And here's the one that everyone is curious about. The appraisal value must be equal or greater than 100% of the total debt of the project. And that includes the lift loan, construction financing, and any other financial sources that may take a security interest in the property. So I'm going to stop here on this one because it seems like there's always a question about the appraisal. So I'm just going to stop and just let us think about that for a second. And of course, that's something too that even though this isn't due until stage 3, might be a good thing to get working on, get started on early. Sometimes they get done quickly, and other times it really takes a while to get on a schedule with an appraiser. Is that Scott? Go ahead.
Yeah, me again. Thank you. We have a mixed income site, so should the appraisal exclude the mixed income? And the reason I'm asking is because the construction financing that we're using might cover both the lift and the non-lift funded homes. So I'm trying to figure out how we should factor that into the equation.
Jessica, is this something you can answer again, or do we need to get back to him on this one? Is this a little complex?
Yeah, it's a little complex, and I think it'll be project dependent. So if you have a subdivided mixed income project and we're not taking a lien or placing our operating agreement on the land underneath those higher income units, then we would not want to see those on the appraisal. But my instinct, and I'll let you know if this is wrong, Scott, but my instinct is that if it's on shared land, then we can continue, or we can consider that increased value with the market units, because we will still have a lien on the land underneath those. It gets a little complicated with interesting, unique projects. So.
Is that enough information for now, Scott? Because I even have questions in my head. That feels like it might be a very nuanced conversation.
Yeah, this will be an email follow-up with Jessica.
Okay,
it's more
sounds
appropriate.
good.
Thank you.
Thanks. Does anybody else have any questions then? Something that maybe that even if it is project specific, then we'll just say, hey, we'll follow up later. Okay. And then lastly, balance pro forma. So even though you did do that that one time, then you'll go back through that pro forma. Then that's where you're going to verify, any committed sources and just clean that up a little bit in case there are any other costs that came in that needed to be adjusted. And of course, those percentages must adhere to the NOFA guidelines for escalation, contingencies, and profit. And that's already set in the application. Anything else? Any questions here before I move on to the next documents? Okay. Okay, so coming back to our LIFT program life cycle, you've now finished your concept proposal. We are going to assume it is November 3rd and you've finished all your due diligence items. And so the next thing, before you get into reservation and loan closing phase, OHCS will present your project to Housing Stability Council for their approval. So as I mentioned before, you're welcome to work through the due diligence tasks at your own pace. If you want to go faster and finish before November 3rd, that's great. But if you do want us to present your project to Housing Stability Council earlier than this December-ish date, please keep in mind that we need about 3 to 4 weeks advance notice to get your project on Housing Stability Council agenda. So think about when you want to close and then just work backwards from that, and certainly be in touch with your development officer so we can make sure that we're all ready to go and working on the same timeline. Okay, so let's assume that you have Housing Stability Council approval and you're going to move on to the reservation and loan closing phase. And this has a hard deadline of February 26, 2027. So we want your loan closed by that date. Unless, there's always one exception, if you have another funder that's part of our loan documents and for some reason they need a little bit more time to finalize some things on their end, that's fine. But we need to be 100% ready to go on our end so that as soon as that happens, we're just ready to move ahead. Okay, so after Housing Stability Council approval, OHCS will send a formal reservation letter and a new attachment A with all the additional conditions that you will have for the remainder of the LIFT loan cycle. So this reservation letter will serve as your official notification of award. So you can feel comfortable knowing that we have formally reserved these funds for your project. Of course, that means you still have to meet some of these additional conditions, final requirements, and have a successful loan closing. And just to reiterate again that our goal is to have this completed by February 26th. Now, for those of you that have worked with us before, this reservation letter date is a really important date. This serves as the official start of your project. So we base a lot of the future deadlines off of that date. Of course, it's going to be different depending on when you get Housing Stability Council or whatever. But from that reservation letter date, we expect that you begin vertical construction within 18 months, that you complete construction of all the homes within 36 months, and that all funds are either dispersed or requested for disbursement within that 36-month time period too. Then lastly, all the homes should have sold within 42 months of that reservation letter date. So of course, once you get to this next stage, you'll have these tasks set aside in Procore, so you'll be able to follow along just to prepare yourself for that closing. Okay. Okay, so the next thing you will do once as you get that reservation letter, then we're going to prepare to close the LIFT loan. So you have some responsibilities and we have some responsibilities. So again, just follow those tasks in Procore. They'll all be laid out, usually in sequential order with due dates of what you need to accomplish. If you ever get confused or don't need some help there, your development officers are always available to answer questions for you and the relevant parties as well. So you'll open an escrow with a title company. You'll order an updated title report. We mentioned that you had ordered one originally, and now we're just going to update that again as we get ready to close. You'll also order an Alta lender's policy in the amount of the LIFT loan. So that's happening. Also, it's going to be at this time that your development officer is going to send you the project-specific loan documents. So that's what's happening here on our end. We send you those project-specific loan documents to you, the borrower, and it's up to you to make sure that those get distributed to all the people that need them, and we've been working with the team at this point. So, we're all in communication, but it ultimately is your responsibility to get those out. And with that, then you're going to lead all parties to closing. So part of that is facilitating these loan documents and making sure your party reviews them, and just getting in touch with us, sending documents back and forth. And also, before I talk about negotiations with counsel and DOJ, I just want to bring up a quick point about attorneys. And attorneys are so invaluable to what we do. Like, we couldn't do so much of this work without them. But please keep in mind that if one group has representation, then we all need to have representation present. And that also goes for emails. So if you want to include an attorney in a conversation we're having, even an email one, let's have consensus first amongst each other before we start including legal counsel. And that's for a couple of reasons. One thing is because we need to make sure everybody has counsel representing them. And also, every time that DOJ or another attorney is included on something, that's going to be a charge that you will ultimately incur. So if we've got DOJ on all our emails and they're not really their participation really isn't necessary ones, you're still going to get charges for those. So as I said, let's just wait till it's time to bring counsel in, and then we'll decide and do that together, and it'll help keep some costs low. So yeah, so there's that. And then usually if your counsel wants to speak with DOJ, say they want to discuss some loan documents or something, it's just best that if you and I communicate, or you and your development officer communicate, and then we'll put DOJ and your attorneys in touch. We find that it's a better use of time, and they can really work a lot more efficiently and quickly if we just let them get together and do that. And the last thing I'm going to say about attorneys and loan documents here is that when you ask your counsel to review these documents, the purpose is to catch errors or see if they need to discuss a term that's completely unworkable as written. We've spent a lot of time over the past couple of years speaking with different attorneys that we work with on a regular basis to make sure that we have our loan documents in a good place. So please don't encourage your counsel just to make changes that merely might be a preference in a way to say something, or maybe wordsmithing the documents, because we're just going to change them back, and then you're going to have to pay for that. So, again, if it's something that it's unworkable as written, then we'll get our attorneys together. Okay. So any questions on our responsibilities and your responsibilities? And I'm not done. Because the next part of your responsibilities will be to get insurance in place. I do want to briefly talk about payouts through escrow, and then how we actually execute those legal agreements. So I'll go into greater depth on the next 3 slides with that. Okay. Oh, and we are running out of time. I got to move quickly. Okay, insurance requirements. This again is in that. Oh, this is in the NOFA. This is in the lift manual. And when you get your reservation letter with these conditions, it's also written in there. But evidence of closing for you, the borrower, for the architect and any licensed professionals, and the GC, evidence of this insurance is due at closing. Now, after closing, OHCS will only request updates to your certificate of insurance. However, it is your responsibility to make sure that these other entities are maintaining the required insurance for the correct amount of time. And again, just check the NOFA if you want to know what this is before you get to this point. Okay, so I mentioned payouts through escrow, and this is done through a draw request. So I'm going to just briefly touch on draw requests. So this is reimbursement or payment of invoices. It doesn't have to be something you've already paid. The funds do not need to be split among all the homes. They can just be spent in one chunk on the site work or just spend it all on the first few homes. It really doesn't matter. And you can draw for costs that incurred up to 12 months prior to the launch of this year's NOFA. And so this is done through a draw request form that is in your Procore Work Center. That's where you can download the form. We have some guidance on eligible expenses, and then you'll upload there as well. Now, you don't have this information yet, but it's coming. You'll get it. And just know, too, that the draw form is for homeownership development. Some of you do work with affordable rental housing. They have their own draw form. We have ours, so just use ours. As far as disbursement of funds, this will always need to go directly into the account of you, the borrower. Now, the one exception to that is if we're doing a payout in escrow, all payments need to go to the title company, and then the title company will disperse those payments to the service providers. So yeah, if you think you want to do a payout during escrow, please talk to your development officer about that, and we'll make sure we get that in place. But other than that, you can start drawing on funds once the loan documents are recorded, and that goes for escrow as well. You know, we record the loan documents in escrow, and then they can disperse the payments. Also, just know that there's a maximum of one draw request per month, and I already talked about requesting or having all funds dispersed within 36 months. So we are going to have a training in June to go over more of our forms in greater detail, and the draw request form is definitely going to be something we'll talk about in that training. So I'm not going to go over this anymore because we've got more to talk about. All right, executing the LIFT loan documents. So as I said, we've been involved with all the parties. Everyone's reviewed the documents. Let's say we've come to our agreement. We are happy with the way they look. So your development officer will generate these final loan documents and send them to you to give your final approval on behalf of all your other funders. Again, we've been talking about this for a while, so everyone should be on the same page. No surprises there. Then your development officer will send this packet of LIFT documents to the escrow officer. You will schedule to sign these documents with the escrow officer, and you should oversee coordination with the other non-OHCS parties with that. Also, you are going to have a couple charges that you need to be prepared to pay at the close of escrow, and that is a 2% reservation charge, and that's 2% of the award amount. Legal charges, $300 per document, and some document prep charges. Now, as I said, this is $300 per document, but if you do end up with some negotiations, we may bill you for those things later. It might end up being more than $300 per document. But we will send that invoice to the escrow officer before we close and let you know what those charges are so you are prepared to come in to pay those costs. These funds may not, OHCS funds may not be used to pay these charges. So just think about that, what other sources you have to pay those. Okay, so you've closed the loan and you are ready to begin construction. So we're going to go pretty quickly through these next three, but referring back to that reservation letter date, as far as the construction deadlines are concerned, we expect that you start construction within 18 months of that reservation letter date. Completion and home sales, so all certificates of occupancy should be submitted within 36 months of the reservation date, and all homes sold within 42 months. And as I said, that compliance and monitoring, that will typically go for 20 years, a minimum of 20 years, and typically 40. And I'll give you some more information on that soon. So this construction phase, once you get here, again, Procorm's going to have all these tasks outlined for you. You'll have your first equity and contracting report due within 30 days of loan closing. Elizabeth is going to do a training on that a little bit later on down the road, so you know what that is. A copy of her ground lease must be recorded prior to selling any homes. That is maybe obvious. Once you close on the loan, you're going to have quarterly progress reports. So due each quarter. It's an online form, and there's a link in the task and program where you can just go in and answer those questions. We'll provide a list ahead of time so you can be prepared as to what you need to answer. Once you get building permit approval, we're going to ask you to submit a copy of that and just clarify those home addresses. And in this construction phase, you'll just have some annual document updates, whether that's your tax returns or certificates of insurance. Maybe that's not annual, but whenever that policy expires. Okay, we're moving. You just completed all your homes. So once you get those certificates of occupancy, you kind of move into this completion and home sales stage. So you will start doing a certificate of continuing program compliance. This begins after the first home sale or 36 months after the reservation letter date, whichever is sooner. This will also include a monitoring charge of $25 per home. So again, you'll have document updates. You'll be submitting the certificates of occupancy. You'll be reporting to us on home sales and providing income verification and demographic data. And then once let's see, I think there's one other thing I want to tell you here, that once you have sold all the homes, then you no longer have to do those quarterly progress reports. So that might be a nice reward for you. And then lastly, once you've sold all those homes, we're going to have a project closeout where you'll do a final pro forma and let us know what your actual costs were. You'll confirm those home details like the utilities. Did you really put in solar if you said you were going to? Did you really have ADA units? And then you'll do your final equity and contracting report. And then finally, your very last stage of the LIFT life cycle, you'll move into this compliance and monitoring where we maybe just touch base maybe once a year. You'll have these annual certificates of continuing program compliance, that same monitoring charge, and then those document updates, whether that's tax returns or certificates of insurance. This one, renewing your affordability period. So you get to the 20-year affordability period is coming to a close, and you have some options on 3 options on what you want to do for the remainder of this cycle. And we're not going to do too much here, but you can repay your LIFT loan in full if you want to. I would be surprised if someone did that, but you can. This is the most common. You can sign up for another 20 years of affordability for a total of 40 years, and then your loan will be satisfied, no payment due at the end of that 20 plus an additional 20. Or you can discuss a mix of repayment and affordability. So these are probably bigger conversations for another day, but this is 20 years down the road, so hopefully we don't have to worry about it too much. And so we have just a few minutes left for questions, but we have made it through the whole LIFT program lifestyle, lifestyle. It's a lifestyle, it's a life cycle, all those things. So does anyone have any questions? Well, I know that was a lot of talking. We just love to talk a lot, say a lot of things, but as I said, you're going to just see this over and over and over again. And you can't get lost as long as you reach out to Elizabeth and me at any time with your questions, or we're here to help you. Our goal is for all of us to have a successful close and a successful project that's going to last for years and years. Let's see, I see Daniel?
Yeah, just a quick check. Are these slides going to be made available after the meeting?
Yes, probably not immediately after, but we will have the slide deck available and a recording.
Super. Yeah. An ETA on that then? Could you, is it possible to know?
I think the question I have on that is, I know that we're having to do some updates on our project, on our website. So Talia or Jessica, do you know where we are with being able to have things available right away?
So we can get the video posted probably by the end of next week. Roughly that'll be my guess. So that's where the recording will go. We won't actually post the slide deck to the website, but we can send a copy of the slide deck out if you request it.
Okay.
That would be great. Do I request to you, Jessica?
Why don't
You can request it to your development officer, or me, honestly.
Yeah.
Fair enough.
And we'll get this under, we're just going through a lot of accessibility compliance right now. So some things that we've formally been able to just post right away, we now need to just make sure that they everybody has access, So.
Fair enough.
Mhm. All right. Well, you've been a wonderful crowd. Thank you so much. And Elizabeth, thanks for helping in the chat there, and Jessica for your contribution. And so you get 1 minute of your time back today. Spend it wisely. And thanks again for all your support and participation.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Thanks, Susie. Good job.
Thank you. Whew, that was a lot.
Yeah. We gotta
All right.
jump to that next meeting now.
Oh, that's right. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. See you there. Bye.
Bye.